Around January of this year, the residents of an affluent neighborhood across town began noticing things missing from their yards. At least that's how it started. As the weeks passed, their homes started to be burglarized. One by one, street by street, the burglary spread. When April arrived, barely 1% of the homes remain untouched. Probably because most of the residents of those homes were retired and spent their days at home rather than leaving them unattended. The robberies slowed greatly but never completely stopped. Even after 4 months had passed, the police were no closer to finding a suspect. May was starting to look like the end of the crimes until they accelerated once again in a new neighborhood. This one just a mile from mine. While not as wealthy, these homeowners still had plenty of goodies to draw the thief or thieves to them. I say thief or thieves because at that time no one was sure how many crooks there were. Odds said it was more than one simply due to the number and speed of the crimes. Somehow, maybe because the robberies made the cops look bad, the break-ins managed to stay out of the news. One story popped up by June but was unexplainably buried deep into the back of the paper. Just as before, the thieves blew through house after house, taking anything not nailed down, and got away unseen by anyone. It's often reported all it takes is for one person to notice something small to break case wide open. It was a little old lady who noticed something strange on her street that would lead to the resolution of this one. She reported that it struck her as strange to the garbage men who had only just picked up her trash returned about an hour later, and another truck. This time, however, they only drove up and down streets and never stopped to pick anything up. The report wasn't taken very seriously at first, but a couple of detectives decided to follow up on it. They waited until it was the regular pickup day and watched the habits of the garbage men working the route. At first, all seemed normal. However, a few hours into their stakeout, they noticed 4 men and a different truck turned down an alley in front of them. Continuing to watch the men, the detectives noticed the truck stop halfway down the alley and the men approach the rear of the house. This spurred their curiosity, and they decided to question the men in the truck. When the men saw the detectives coming, to ran off, but the other 2 stayed where they were, calling for backup. The 2 had run off, were soon picked up. All 4 were arrested and within hours confessed to being part of a burglary ring. They had successfully robbed over 300 homes in our city. Despite being in a different make of garbage truck, they had taken the extraordinary measures of painting the city logo on the doors of the truck just as our actual ones are. Even crazier was the 4 men were arrested wearing the very same uniforms or trashmen were. The authorities freely admitted that had not the nosy old woman noticed the second truck, they may not have ever caught them. Although they did catch them when it came out soon after that the ring that they were a part of most likely spanned the entire country and are believed to have killed at least 5 homeowners during burglaries in other states. This is all the information we currently have, and hopefully for your own sake, that this group has not made it to your area and never do. Regardless of this threat exists near you, I felt it was important to pass on this story. If anything, just let you know what to look for if the burglary rates increases in your neighborhood. Not to mention, you got to admit, this is an ingenious way to go unnoticed. Upon the death of my mother in June, I inherited my parents' house. The house has been the one I grew up in, but I hadn't visited for some time. Since it was paid off, I saw no reason to stay in my apartment. So I moved in soon after the funeral. The house was in considerable disrepair, and I've devoted a large amount of my free time to fixing the little things I felt comfortable messing with. One major project I was not comfortable tackling was the garage door hated broken on my mother, and without my dad around to fix it and no money to get it repaired, it did remain stuck open for at least the past year or more. It was going to have to stay that way until I could scrounge up the money to have a handyman look at it. Much worse than the state of the house is the rapid decline of the neighborhood. It's never been an upper-class area, but in the brief span of 15 years, it's degraded greatly. According to the local news, a young woman was assaulted a mere 2 blocks from me. If I would have known how dangerous the old neighborhood had become, I certainly wouldn't have moved in. I'm a single female myself, and this amount of crime makes me feel very unsafe. Despite my regrets, this is my home for the time being. I have to move forward in my life. During the week, I usually leave before sunset and don't return often until after sundown. On the weekends, I try to adhere to the same schedule, except instead of leaving for work around dawn, I visit the market and return before the residents can see me. This lifestyle has allowed me to exist separately from my neighbors, and that's the way I liked it. This concept of out of sight, out of mind has served me well. I'm a homebody anyway, always have them. And so I don't mind staying inside all day. Lord knows all the repairs to this place have kept me busy. My days have been like this since I moved in. But I decided to take my summer vacation last week, and something terrifying happened that Monday morning. It was a peaceful one and not out of the ordinary until I noticed the screech of the garbage truck. The sound reminded me I had forgotten to put out the can for them. On my way out the door, I grabbed the back from the kitchen. I'd been keeping the can in the garage and was about to roll it out when I noticed the flash out of the corner of my eye. Turning to get a better look, I could clearly see a raggedy man attempting to scurry away. Unfortunately for us both, I was blocking his only way through the junk and out to freedom. When it became clear to him that he couldn't escape, he stopped about 6 feet and peered at me with a wicked snarl on his face. He may not have known it at the time, but I didn't intend on trapping him in there. It was just that I was frozen in my spot from terror. And I couldn't move an inch. And as a result of my fear was that I began yelling at him uncontrollably. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Both questions blurted out of my mouth before I even realized what was happening. Once I started speaking, I began taking back control of myself and yelled out at him again. "What are you doing here?" I could hear the fear in my voice as I said it. I suppose he heard it too, because a smug little grin took the place, the sneer on his dirty mug. "Are you okay? Now?" Somehow, without either of us noticing, the garbage truck had pulled into the alleyway next to where Mike usually was, and the garbage man was standing halfway up my driveway. I assumed my yelling had gotten his attention, and he had walked up to investigate. His question caused me to jump in. My fear got even worse until I turned around and saw his uniform, the truck parked behind him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," heard yelling, and wanted to make sure everything was cool. "Is it happening? Do you know this man? Is he supposed to be on your property?" I guess the look on my face betrayed my feelings. For a moment or two, we all stared at each other, unsure of what to do. Then the garbage man looked into my eyes and slowly waved me over to him. I must have been when I needed to help me move. Without a moment's hesitation, I began backing out of the garage, never taking my eyes off the man in front of me. He did the same thing. The moment I reached the garbage man, my fear started to evaporate. Now that I was safely next to him, we continued to watch the invader. It seemed now that he no longer had the advantage over me. He had become afraid. His eyes darted back and forth between the two of us until the garbage man spoke. "Look, dude, you need to get out of here and don't come back. If you do, all the cops we call spread the word of your friends. This place is off limits from now on." What he said made me want to laugh, but at the same time I couldn't argue with the message. No sooner than he finished, the guy shot like a bullet out of the garage and down the alley of the guy out of sight. The garbage man let out a big gasp and started chuckling. "I don't know about you, but I was terrified that I had no idea what to do." I know that speech probably sounded pretty stupid, but I was flying by the seat of my pants the whole time. "Are you okay? He didn't get his hands on you, did he?" I was in awe. The whole time. He seemed like he was in complete control and knew just what he was doing. I'm glad he had good instincts. My adrenaline slowed down about this time, and the seriousness of my predicament hit me like a truck. I buckled and fell to my knees, fighting the urge to vomit the whole time. He suggested I sit still with my head between my knees and breathe slowly. He obviously knew how this sounded and explained the purpose behind it. He hadn't led me astray yet, so I took the advice. I'm unsure how long we sat in my driveway talking, but it was at least an hour. The talking helped me to take my mind off the nausea. I told him a bit about what had happened and the problem with the door that caused it. When he went back to his truck, I was feeling a lot better. Upon returning to the safety of the house, I locked it down and stayed in the rest of the day and the next sometime after 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. Knocking came at the front door. Reluctant at first, I eventually looked at the peephole and saw that it was the garbage man. But in normal street clothes, my run-in on Monday was still very much on my mind. Despite him being the one to help me, I still didn't open the door right away. Instead, I asked him what he wanted through the door. I'm off today, so I thought I'd come over and fix the garage to a few. If that's okay, that is taking a moment to think it over. I told him it was I didn't have the money to have anyone else do it. I watched him walk around toward the back of the house, carrying a toolbox with him. It was over an hour before I got the nerve to go outside and thank him. We asked while he worked, and by the late afternoon he had fixed it. I made him dinner as a thank you, and he left just after 7. It was the least I could do. While I'm not sure where this all may lead, knowing I have a guardian angel may make living in this neighborhood a little less scary. While I was in CVS the other day picking up a prescription, I noticed the fall Thanksgiving-themed things that were being stocked on the shelves. Every year around this time, when I began seeing these decorations, I'm reminded of a horrible accident I witnessed 5 years ago this year. Although no one I care for was injured in it, the outright shocking nature at the scene and the ultimate result of those who were indeed involved, it still never fails to cast a shadow on the season's gatherings. I'm sure I'm not the only American that finds himself buried in chores this time of year. The particular day of the wreck, I was in and out of the office all day. The minute I was finally able to dig into work, something else was needed or went wrong. I went on a return trip from Staples, taking it easy as I went because of a recent freeze combined with the automatic sprinklers made it a slippery go. The driver just in front of me had made it halfway through the intersection when they were suddenly T-boned by a trash truck from out of nowhere. Instead of stopping right away, both vehicles continued sliding sideways until they ultimately stopped by a bank building sitting on the corner of the block. I must have stopped myself because once they finally hit the building, I noticed I wasn't moving. The wreck appeared to be moving in slow motion and seemed to have lasted several minutes, which of course could not have. Myself and one other guy got out of our cars and ran over to help the drivers. When I reached the trash truck and opened the driver's door, both men were unconscious. The cab of the truck looked as if it was welded to the driver's side of the car. If we're ever going to get her out of the car, and we were going to have to back up the truck somehow. A pair of paramedics showed up about this time. We had a quick powwow to figure out our next move. Since the fire truck still hadn't arrived, we volunteered to help them out. Although the female driving the car was conscious, a lot of blood was pouring down her face, and she was very confused. We knew the longer she sat without any medical assistance, the worse she would get. A quick glance at the windshield of the truck told me nothing had changed. Neither man was awake. They could have been dead for all I knew, but I wasn't willing to wait any longer. Climbing into the cab, I pushed the driver aside and searched around until I found the ignition. To everyone's joy, the truck started. Finding the transmission took me a tad longer, but I did. It did fight me at first, but Ty jiggled the shifter until I got it to engage as it slowly rolled backwards. The car's door ripped away from the body of the car, giving the paramedics the much-needed access to the driver we'd all hoped for. Happy that we'd had enough room to get her out. I killed the ignition in the truck just in time for the truck's driver to regain consciousness. The fire truck did arrive on the scene soon after having been held up by another multi-car wreck a few blocks away. Now that the pros were all there, me and the other driver stepped aside and let them do their jobs. Within the hour, all drivers and passengers were on their way to the hospital, and the scene was almost completely cleaned up. Confidence I wasn't going to get any more work done for the day I had at home. I kept my eyes on the paper and TV for any news on the condition of those involved in the crash. But it wasn't until the week before Thanksgiving that I heard anything. Unfortunately, the female driver in the car died 3 days after. Although she was healing well, I was thought to be going home soon. Late one night, she threw a blood clot and passed away. She was not the only one. However, the guy riding shotgun in the trash truck never regained consciousness. At some point during the course of the accidents, he had a heart attack and died right there. Even though he was the one driving the truck, I don't blame or hold any ill will against the garbage man. He was just another part of many other vehicle accidents that day. I guess if I wanted to be angry at someone, I could point the finger at the businesses who run their sprinklers, even during the fall and winter, but I'm not really mad at anyone. This time of year is supposed to be about the meaning of family and all the things we have to be thankful for. And perhaps witnessing the last moments of people does cast a bit of a shadow over the season. And despite all of that, I am thankful had been nice struck by that truck that day. I may not have been alive to celebrate another holiday with those I love. I can't think of anything better to be thankful for. On February 24, 1999, Michael Ruiz would be accidentally killed in a fight with one of his fellow sanitation engineers outside their place of work. The death was ultimately judged as an act of self-defense. The other members involved in the altercation stated on multiple occasions that he was attacked from behind by Ruiz. The two men who witnessed the fight agreed with the defendant. One of them later said he pounced on Tony like he was possessed by a rabid animal. I've never seen him act that way before. Tony had no chance but to fight back, and Mike went for his eyes. It was obvious this had become a fight for his life. The evening of his death, the police carefully searched Ruiz's home, hoping to discover a motive to the attack on his coworker. What they would discover would shed light on the inner mind of a man in the depths of psychological collapse and the events that led to it. Unknown to anyone other than the officers there that day and Ruiz himself, Tony Campbell, the defendant, had prevented a terrible act of bloodshed from happening a mere 2 days later. The following paragraphs come from a notebook of papers written by Ruiz. It documents the awful plan he was soon to set into action and the unfortunate events that he felt justified him to strike out against his enemies. Although a few names of people and locations may have been changed or omitted to preserve the privacy, all pertinent information surrounding the actions mentioned above had been left intact. Now I present you all with the media entitled The Bloody Plan of Micro Ruiz and the Poor Excuses for It. My life was as savage as any other's, I suppose. I was bullied just like anyone else. Even though I despised it at the time, it would soon be my first lesson in the dynamics of power. It's not often discussed, but we all learn our place in the pecking order eventually. No doubt my bully had been bullied by someone else in his life. He was simply paying it forward in order for me to learn my place in life, just as he had. The way in which we are reminded of our place changes as we grow. In college, the professors take the place of the bullies and use their superior position in the school to do so. Once our real life truly starts, our adult one, as long as we remain among our own people, no one should have any reason to knock us back into our place. The only part of our lives this may differ is at a workplace. They're nothing more than a more serious form of school anyhow. Your boss should really be the one single person who can truly be in the right for correcting you. Unless, of course, he's nothing more than just another of your peers with a fancy title. At that point, he's on the same level as you and should by all rights keep his mouth shut. From the first day I learned this unfortunate lesson, I lived by this rule. I was confident that as long as I remembered my place and stayed in it for the remainder of my life, I'd have a decent one. However, on February 26, 1998, I discovered no matter how hard I worked, loved my family or said my prayers, I couldn't prevent the death of my daughter. The verdict was SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. What kind of answer was that? It no way tells you how she actually died. It seems to me just another way of saying, we don't know. When it happened, I was ready to end it all right then. But fortunately, I still had Heather. Everyone around us said that as long as we stuck together, we'd make it through. Time heals all wounds, and the rest of that empty garbage. She didn't even wait 3 months before she left something about my suffocating grief, whatever that's supposed to mean. For the second time that year, I made the decision to check out, but the same people gave me the same platitudes. Although I have no reason to listen, I did. Some force inside me drove me forward. Perhaps I had attempted to get above my station in life and become too proud of the things I had. So I believed them when they told me to let time do its thing. It hadn't been more than 5 months since my life began to collapse before my coworkers began mocking me. As with the other problems, I believed this treatment to be a reminder for my peers that I had let my pride take over. Over time, though, the barbs and banter began to take a tone of vindictiveness, and I took my concerns to my supervisor. Instead of the support I had expected, he made it clear that I was in some way responsible for this treatment. This is when it finally clicked in my head. It wasn't myself that had lost his way. It was those around me who had become eaten up with pride. I could see it clearly now. Fancy cars, expensive vacations to the Bahamas, we would garbage meant for God's sakes. It was me who would be responsible for reminding them of how far they had strayed. The following months flew by quickly as I first formed my plan in my mind and then put it into action. Any free minutes I had was used to create my mind and then build with my hands. As the days grew closer to my deadline, I feared I wouldn't finish my work in time. But if you are reading this, I obviously have, and I'm no longer here to suffer. If you find yourself wondering why I chose the 26th as the day to execute my plan, I figured the anniversary of the day I lost my Anita no finer a time to remind my peers of how far they have strayed. If the 2 bombs I planted at the administration building have not managed to destroy some, if not all my coworkers, my supervisors included, I'm more than confident the one I planted at his home will, at least in the life of the man who was most lost his way and was responsible for his entire path of retribution I have been forced upon. All ultimately, I am only comforted by the fact that it was me who maintained his true path in life. I pray there is a place I may be together with my neither once more. Do not condemn me for what I've done. I've simply taken upon myself a task no others had the courage to undertake.